Hello everyone, this is Mathfinder, the home for every math nerd's Pathfinder optimization needs. If you're new here, welcome, and we're so glad to have you. If you've been here before, welcome back, and thank you so much for your continued support. Before we get into the video, I wanted to talk a little bit about channel logistics. I am trying to push for the channel to grow. I am trying to push for this channel to get to a point where I can get out the content I want to all the people who want to watch it. So if you're not currently subscribed and you enjoy my videos, please consider subscribing. Subscribing helps the channel grow and helps it get to other people. If you can, click the notifications bell, which is also a good metric for channels. Joining a channel membership is also a direct way to support me and gives you access to a few perks. If you can do none of those things, please like and comment. Those are also always a big help. Every little bit helps, and every little bit makes sure that I can get the content out to you as you like it and as frequently as you like it. I'm sure most of you know this, but last week Paizo released their spring 2026 errata, and it was pretty massive. Now there's been a lot of discourse online about the errata, and I made a Reddit post about it myself, going into every single change that stood out to me. I'll link that post in the video description below, as well as a link to Paizo's errata website. Now this change has been huge, but only one change has really been getting attention in online discourse: the immunities, weaknesses, and resistance change, which I will get into at the end of this video. If you just want to see that, feel free to skip right ahead till there. But I would recommend going through the rest of this video too, because really, I mean this sincerely, the errata is really good overall. There are a lot of good changes. There are clarifications for rules that previously were unclear. There are even clarifications that prevent certain bad faith interpretations of rules that I had seen before. And there are minor tweaks for quality of life improvements for certain characters and certain options in the game. And I believe this is not the entirety of the errata. There's apparently more coming. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I have heard people say that there's a second part to the errata coming out later in the spring. So overall, I think Paizo did a really good job with this errata, and I really think that needs to be talked about. So this video is going to go through a whole bunch of changes that stood out to me. This is not exhaustive. There are many more changes that I did not cover. Some minor, some potentially major, but maybe I didn't perceive them as major. But I am going to go into whatever I thought was interesting enough to talk about, and then at the end, talk about weaknesses and resistances. Let's get into it. The first major change I wanted to talk about, and one I'm so happy for, is changes to psychic amps. So I covered this glitch before. You can see it in my video about the Psychic Remastered, the Dark Archive preview, linked above, where I talked about how they potentially introduced a glitch into how the psychic amps work in an attempt to fix something else. So there was a goal in the remaster to disallow amps from working with action-compressed cantrips, something like spell striking with an amped imaginary weapon, or even a summoner using act together on a spell amp that they poached via the psychic dedication. And while I do think that was a good design goal to have, it also incidentally disallowed psychics from using reaction and free action amps, because just the way it was worded meant you could not amp something that you did not cast during your own turn. Now, of course, one could mostly guess at the intent of this remaster. For example, amped guidance and amped entropic wheel, rules as written, are not allowed, but I cannot imagine any GM actually going with that rule. So sane GMs would definitely allow these things to happen, and they would perhaps even let them fall under a specific override's general kind of ruling. Likewise, I think any GM would understand that the intent of that nerf was to disallow amped spell strike or amped act together, and either choose to disallow it as per raw, or they might house rule it and say, no, this works anyways because we find it fun. But regardless, at these extremes, the intent is clear. No sane GM is going to say you cannot use amped guidance or entropic wheel, and plenty of GMs are going to say you cannot amp spell strikes or act together, and the ones who overrule it are doing so knowingly. The issue is not at the extremes. there are still cases of genuine confusion that can exist between both these extremes. And this is somewhere I want to address a little bit of almost revisionist history I'm seeing. I've seen some folks say that the psychic amp issue was never a big deal and there's no confusion because in these two extremes, this dichotomy I created, it's very clear what the issue is. Obviously, psychics should be allowed to amp their own reactions, but other characters should not. There's a lot of cases in the middle of these two extremes. So, quiz time. Using the pre-errata Dark Archive Remastered wording, which of these is allowed? You can see the wording in my video or in any of the previews about Dark Archive, and if you have a PDF, it'll have that wording. There are 4 questions in this quiz. Can I amp a cantrip that I readied to cast off turn? Can I amp a cantrip that I cast in response to my commander friend using Slip and Sizzle? Can I amp the telekinetic projectile that I get for free as part of dismissing a previously amped vector screen? Can I amp a cantrip that I cast after foreseen failure? In my opinion, these interactions were not clear pre-errata. You could take 10 different reasonable GMs who are not trying to oppress their psychic players, and they would come up with 10 different combinations of yes-no answers to these 4 questions. The errata clears it up exactly. The answer is yes, yes, no, and yes. The errata makes it explicitly clear that if you're using a reaction or free action to cast your cantrip, you are indeed allowed to amp it. It's just when it's being lumped into a different activity entirely, it's disallowed. That's why number 3 is a no, but everything else is a yes. And in my opinion, this is a good clarification. This fixes a pretty major issue with the psychic. Again, the issue did not exist at the extremes. No one sane is arguing that psychics could not use amped entropic wheel. But these 4 cases are a pretty good representation of where this confusion could exist and where a psychic could have a variable, potentially weaker experience depending on GM interpretations. And now the problem's gone, and that's a really good fix. Next up, we have clarifications on the invisibility and disappearance spells. This is one of those cases where arguing for a very strict reading of Raw allowed some people to make these spells more powerful than they're meant to be, especially the case with disappearance, and minorly the case with invisibility. So let me explain how. There have been 2 separate clarifications, one for invisibility and one for disappearance. The invisibility spell got clarification saying that it's not overriding how the regular invisible condition works. Some people previously thought that because the invisibility spell says you become undetected, it overrides the part of the invisible condition that says if you turn invisible in front of someone, you become hidden, not undetected. Now, to many players and GMs, including myself, the rules always said that you're going to become hidden if you turn invisible directly in front of someone, because it's embedded into the condition. But now with this clarification, there is no argument that it can be overridden at all. It explicitly says that's not the case. If you cast a spell directly in front of someone, they can guess the 5-foot cube you're in. This was always the case, but it is really nice to no longer have ambiguity here. And then disappearance has actually had 2 relatively major clarifications. First up, it actually provides you the invisible condition. Previously, it said you counted as invisible, did not say you had the invisible condition, which a lot of people interpreted to mean you get the good parts of invisible, but you don't get the bad parts. So, for example, you cannot be spotted by See the Unseen because you don't actually have the invisible condition. In my opinion, much like the hidden undetected issue before, it was always obvious that you actually had the invisible condition both for good and bad. Now it's explicitly obvious. There's no wording of it counting as something that you can mess around with. You just have the condition and any downsides that might come with it, like being visible to See the Unseen. And secondly, there was a change where now it only says it blocks precise senses. Previously, it said both precise and imprecise, but now it just says precise. And this has left a little bit of confusion among people because they think maybe it got nerfed, but it actually didn't. The whole idea of imprecise senses is that they always treat enemies as if they're invisible. Think about it. What does it mean when somebody's invisible to, say, your vision in Pathfinder? It means if you know the square they're in, they're hidden, and if you don't know the square they're in, they're undetected. That's exactly the case for imprecise senses. With an imprecise sense, no matter what enemy you're detecting, whether they're visible or invisible or hiding or whatever else, if you know the square they're in, they're hidden, and if you don't know the square they're in, they're undetected. The spell is functionally still the same. You are invisible to precise senses, and you're always invisible to imprecise senses. There might be a minor sequencing change where maybe previously in a very specific circumstance, you started undetected, downgraded to hidden, and then upgraded to undetected. But now you will start hidden and have to upgrade to undetected. But really, this is a good wording change because previously people took the fact that it blocked imprecise senses to mean that you are completely undetected at all times, that you can't be made hidden whatsoever without explicitly anti-invisibility options like see the unseen or revealing light. The argument was that if you're blocking imprecise senses, you cannot use the seek action whatsoever, therefore the target is completely undetected. In my opinion, this was always a pretty crazy interpretation. An 8th rank spell, despite being so high rank, should not make it completely impossible for an enemy to target you without even offering a saving throw for a whole minute. But now that loophole doesn't exist anymore. It only blocks precise senses. Imprecise senses are left unchanged, which means you will now be treated as a normal invisible person. You can be undetected or hidden depending on whether the target has figured out your square. This is still a very strong spell. Invisibility is a powerful option that then falls off in high-level play because people sometimes have alternate senses, and then disappearance just catches it right back up. Now, something to note here, there are some people who have a strange interpretation of the new rules. They say that since it only blocks precise senses but doesn't block imprecise senses, what this means is, let's take a normal target. They have precise vision, imprecise hearing, and no other senses worth speaking of. That means that if you use disappearance on yourself, they can still use your ears to seek you, but otherwise you are invisible. But if you have precise hearing and precise vision, like say something with echolocation, you can't use seek at all. Because it blocked both of her precise senses, now you have nothing left to seek them with. This to me makes no sense, and in fact gets explicitly contradicted by the very next sentence in Disappearance, where it talks about how you can use your senses to seek a target even while they're being blocked by hearing, say, gaps in the sound spectrum. That's the example it uses. So I think this is also a pretty bad faith interpretation of the rules, and really what it means is if all your precise senses are blocked, you can still seek the target as if you had some kind of an imprecise sense, even if it wasn't specifically hearing. Otherwise, the rules of Disappearance just don't make any sense. So all in all, they made good changes on Invisibility and Disappearance. There are no longer specific wording conundrums that could be exploited to make the spells weirdly more powerful than they need to be, and it's just clear GMs have unambiguous ways to rule these spells now. Next up, a potentially unpopular change, but one that is, in my opinion, a good one still. Resentment Witch ate a pretty massive, and in my opinion, pretty well-deserved nerf. To be clear, I think it's still a strong option, all things considered, but it is no longer as centralizing as it was before. Let's talk about why. So this is how it worked before the errata. Familiar of Ongoing Misery could continue all of the conditions on a target for an additional round. You would use Familiar of Ongoing Misery anytime you cast or sustain an hex, and then that would extend every single condition the target had. This only applies to conditions with a duration, so slowed, stupefied, clumsy, dazzled, blinded. Overall, this was a very, very powerful option, and when combined with occult debuffs, it was quite oppressive in one specific context. We'll talk about that later. In the errata, it works differently. The way it works now is you can extend one condition for one additional round, and then that condition can no longer be extended again. So if you have hit the target with, say, slow, they're slowed 1 for 1 round because it succeeded. You can extend the slowed 1 for 1 more round, which is still really good, and then it cannot be extended anymore. Let's say you hit them with befuddle. They're clumsy and stupefied. You can choose one of the two to extend, not both, and then after extending that one, you can't extend it again. Now, this is a healthy change. In my opinion, this was needed. I don't think the Resentment Witch was overpowered overall in a vacuum. I know a lot of people talk about it being the strongest spellcaster, the strongest witch, brokenly powerful. I didn't think it was broken overall because you can work around their strengths, and in fact, a GM who's throwing a random set of encounters at the Resentment Witch is probably going to work around its strengths as well. But it made one specific subset of fights very, very unfun for everyone, especially for the game master, and that was single boss fights, or really any fight where a significant amount of the fight's complexity, power, and cool factor are all embedded in one character. Because the Resentment Witch could just permanently lock down a target with a nearly 80% success rate, even against bosses. This was specifically a problem with spells like Slow and Synesthesia. Slow, even if the enemy succeeds, is a good spell. Resentment Witch would take a success on a slow and just convert it into a failure. Likewise for Synesthesia, when the enemy succeeds against Synesthesia, they're clumsy 3 for 1 round. That's massive. That's signpost to your party. This is the time to do Burst. If you had a Resentment Witch in the party, even if the enemy succeeded, you didn't need to do any spike damage because all the Resentment Witch did is if they succeed on their saving throw, their reflex and their AC are as if they're 2 levels lower. That's what a -3 means, being 2 levels lower than you are. That would make a moderate boss fight trivial and make an extreme boss fight moderate purely in terms of defensive numbers. And that was oppressive. That was centralizing. I think in the broad scope of things, Resentment Witch was never like a must pick or an overpowered option because all the GM needs to do to work around this is not overuse single target boss fights. But this had a tendency of just taking all of the fun out of these single target boss fights, and that is the bad part. Usually when I say something is good in a certain context, it's okay for it to be good as long as everyone's still getting to have fun and they're just getting to shine a little bit more, because that means everyone at the table will get opportunities to shine, and this one's just your chance to shine. But the Resentment Witch would take single boss fights and not just shine at them, it would kind of ruin them for everyone else, especially the GM. And now that is no longer a problem. It is still a very strong option. If you see people bemoaning that the Resentment Witch is dead now, or it's useless, or it's a terrible caster, none of that is true. It is still a strong option. Extending clumsy, or slowed, or dazzled, or blinded for 1 round can still be a critical juncture of a fight. It can still be one of the most important contributions any character makes to a fight. But you no longer get to just take your pigeon, tell it to stand near your enemy, cast a 2-action spell, and then instantly win the fight with no further effort 80% of the time. And that means the GM feels like they actually get to play even when you're doing your strong thing that lets you have fun. And that is why I think the Resentment Witch is now in a good place, and this is great. Next up, let's talk about shields, and specifically the way they interact with your hands that are holding them. And full disclosure, this used to be a very complex and weird and unintuitive rule, and it still is pretty complex. I think it's clearer now, but it's still complex, so I might get some stuff wrong. I might get a pre-errata interaction wrong, I might get a new interaction wrong. I'm trying my best here. Let's get into it. Shield rules used to be incomplete-ish from the perspective of what happens to the hand that is holding the shield. Here's what they used to say. All shields, unless specifically noted or described otherwise, must be strapped to your arm and held in one hand. So you can't hold anything with that hand and raise a shield, and then you lose the shield's benefits if that hand is no longer free. That's a long sentence with a lot of implicit rules interactions, and that creates some funny interactions. First up, you can't throw a shield, rules as written, because as far as I'm aware, none of the shields describe not being strapped, because the whole idea of being strapped to you was something that came up in the remaster, but shields have existed since release, so they just don't describe straps as far as I can tell. That being said, most GMs will allow you to say that the shield is not strapped to you and let you throw it. That's fine, not a big deal. But it gets more convoluted from there. Let's say a shield is strapped to you. You let go of it, so you're no longer holding it in that hand and can no longer raise that shield or gain any benefits from it. And let's say you go pick something up, like you drink a potion, you open a door, whatever. Is it still strapped to you? If you move, is it moving with you, or have you fully let go of it? Presumably, it's still moving with you because it's strapped to you. But does that mean you're not allowed to detach the shield at all? Is it an action to drop the shield entirely? Is it a free action to drop the shield entirely? Like, I don't know, what if you're fleeing and you need to get rid of bulk to pick up a friend and run with them while they're unconscious? Can you do that? Can you let go of the shield, or is it just strapped to you? Is it an exploration activity to attach a shield? And then let's go back to the throwing builds. If the throwing builds come in with the assumption that they're not strapping their shield, then are the rules just not applying to them? Like, they let go, it just falls in place? There are a lot of confusing interactions that the GM would have to rule here. And to be honest, I think most GMs would rule this reasonably, but the errata does make things a little bit clearer. First, the attach action, the one that straps a shield to you, is now one action using both your hands. The detach action is one action that requires a free hand different from the one holding the shield, which means if you had a regular shield in your hand, both your hands would be occupied while doing this, and if you had a buckler in your hand, one of your hands would be occupied. All of that makes sense. Then it says that when a shield is detached, you're still holding it in one hand usually, just like right after unstrapping it, but at this point you can treat it like a normal held object. You can swap it, drop it, stow it. And finally, while a shield is strapped to you, you are no longer allowed to let go of it as a free action. You must detach before changing your grip on the shield. That is a weird interaction, but I guess I get where it's coming from. It's trying to prevent juggling exploits that perhaps are possible. I'm not 100% sure, but it does raise up a question. What happens when you go unconscious? Before this clarification, the assumption that most GMs made was if you go unconscious, you have dropped the shield. So at some point you could pick it up again before you can benefit from raise a shield, shield block, etc. But because it's strapped to you, it's moving with you. So let's say you go unconscious, you drop your shield, and you drop your weapon. You might then get healed, stand up, pick up your weapon, move, and the shield follows with you. All of that makes sense. I think that was a reasonable interpretation before. This wording of not being able to unequip the shield as a free action and you needing to detach it makes things a little more confusing. When you go unconscious, the shield is still attached, so you can't change grip and drop it, but you must drop it. You went unconscious. So when you get back up, do you just count as having gripped it again? Like, are we just assuming that's being hand-waved? Or are we still requiring an action to grip it if needed, and otherwise it's running around with you and not a useful shield? It's unclear. I'm not sure how I would rule it yet. Honestly, I would probably just rule it in whatever way seems the most convenient at the table for quick ruling, but it is a legitimate problem created by the errata. And second, this one is not a clarity issue. This is a build weakness issue, I suppose. There is a very small subset of builds that might rely on swapping into a new shield. Those have become weaker because you can no longer strap the shield and reliably swap them, whereas previously GMs would have ruled that you could. It was unclear. Some GMs may have ruled you still couldn't, some would have ruled that you could. But now it's explicitly clear that if you're swapping a shield, you must first detach it, then swap it, unless you never attached it in the first place, in which case you suffer all the downsides of not having an attached shield. All of this is very confusing, but ultimately I do think this errata cleared up a lot of things. Throwing builds work more clearly now. A character can transition out of a regular shield into throwing without needing GM fiat. All of these are good clarifications to have. Still a little bit convoluted and confusing though. I can empathize with Paizo having trouble wording this because it's just a really weird and finicky ruling. Next up, what might be my favorite change other than the Psychic Amp fixes, the stunned glitch is finally gone. Some of you may be unfamiliar with this. Stunned used to have a very, very weird interaction. First up, the second sentence of stunned is, "You can't act." And many people interpreted this as flavor text, but it is actually unambiguously defined rules text. There is a rule saying that "you can't act" means you are not allowed to take any actions, including free actions and reactions. There isn't a debate about this, by the way. I have seen some people say, oh, no, "you can't act" is flavor text. That isn't true, because by that reasoning, the paralyzed condition allows you to do anything you want, because all it says is "you can't act." Now, normally, under the normal circumstances where you would become stunned, this might mean something like this. You get the stunned 1 condition. This is probably going to happen outside of your turn. So for example, a spellcaster casts Confusion on a target. It was different than the target's own turn. That target now can no longer take reactions or free actions till the start of their turn, where the stun condition would go away. This is because they can't act. And at the start of that target's turn, they will lose 1 action from the stun condition, stunned ticks down to 0, disappears, and now they're back to normal. They're allowed to act as normal. And on their following turns, they'll have reactions, free actions, whatever. And on this turn, they'll have 2 actions rather than 3. All of this is exactly the way stunned is intended to work under normal circumstances. The glitch happens under a somewhat unique circumstance. What if you became stunned 1 during your own turn? The most classic example of this is ready plus power word stun. But of course, it's not the only one. Ready with Flurry of Blows can do this. The Psychic Amp Forbidden Thought can do this. And plenty of monster abilities might inflict stunned on a crit. So what happens if you end up stunned during your own turn? Well, you can't act. This is rules text. Therefore, your turn ends. You have 3 actions or 2 actions or whatever was left when you got stunned, but your turn just ends because you can't act. Then you continue to not be able to take reactions or free actions till your next turn as normal, and then during that turn, you will lose 1 action and stunned will wear off. Do you see the issue here? Stunned 1 begin to feel like stunned 3 or stunned 4 even, just because it happened during your own turn. This was a very weird glitch, and in my opinion, obviously unintended. But I do know some tables ran this rules as written. Some tables just explicitly allowed the interaction where stunning somebody during their own turn meant that they would lose that turn. Again, this is perfectly rules as written. That is exactly what "you can act" means. But because this feels too good to be true, a lot of GMs use one of 2 different house rules to fix this glitch. And one of those 2 different house rules has now just become the official rule. If for any reason you become stunned during your own turn, you first complete whatever action you are in the middle of. Then you will immediately lose actions to reduce your stunned value. So if, say, you moved during your turn and somebody who had readied Flurry of Blows attacked you, you got stunned by it, you moved, you got stunned 1, it'll take away your second action, and then you'll get your third action as normal. The "you can't act" glitch no longer exists because the stun condition just wears off through the condition that you could not act during. Again, it's a funny glitch, and I think most GMs would not have allowed this interaction anyways, and it's so rare for it to even come up that most GMs probably never had to make the choice, but it is nice to have it patched up. This is one of those things where 90% of the player base will probably never encounter the problem that would have caused the glitch, but counting down stunned mid-turn just Existing as an interpretation is really good for when the situation pops up to prevent rules arguments, to prevent feels bad interpretations. So overall, a really good change. Like I said, my second favorite on this errata. Finally, let's speed run through a bunch of miscellaneous, but still very important changes. First up, let's talk about Guns and Gears, which seems to have gotten an extensive look during this errata pass. Advanced weapon innovation for the inventor now counts as an initial modification for prerequisites in whatever feats might require them. This is good. Previously, inventors who chose this weapon innovation were ineligible for certain feats because this just did not count as an initial modification. Next up, the inventor dedication now correctly says it needs a +2 intelligence prerequisite. Previously, it said +3. And while I know a lot of people always assumed it was meant to be +2, it wasn't clear. It's possible that Paizo thought this just deserved the +3. There are dedications that have 2 ability requirements, like say Exemplar needing both +2 strength and +2 con. It's not too crazy to imagine that maybe they thought Inventor really deserved +3, but now it's clear it needs a +2. Finally, Fireworks Technician lost some of its external flexibility, but gained some internal flexibility. Let me explain. Previously, the version of Quick Alchemy that Fireworks Technician got would let you make any of the alchemical vials you have access to, including ones from other alchemical archetypes. Now, this was unfortunate because Fireworks Technician gets Quick Alchemy as a way to use their fireworks and bombs, but now you can use it to use other really strong archetypes, some of which have arguably stronger alchemical options, and they kind of de-emphasize the thing you took this archetype for. Now, that is no longer the case. It does not apply to external alchemical options, but the list of things it works on other than fireworks is bigger than it used to be. There have also been a bunch of buffs for its feats. I have not gone through them and evaluated them in detail because honestly, I don't know how weak or strong the archetype used to be, so I don't have a good baseline to evaluate them. Just take a good look at the errata and decide for yourself if you think the archetype is better, worse, or the same as before. Then there were a whole bunch of changes in the player core. Way too many to get into. Even in Guns and Gears, there were a few changes I just did not talk about. Player core had so many changes, and so did GM core. I'll be highlighting a few of them here. First up, mature animal companions now explicitly allow you to use burrow, climb, fly, or swim instead of stride, which is really nice. Previously, they could only stride, and while this was annoying for burrowing, climbing, swimming companions, this was debilitating for flying companions because they couldn't keep themselves aloft without help from you. Now that is fixed. If you don't command your flying animal companion, it'll just stay aloft and do nothing else. This is also a place where I need to add a little extra clarification. The errata came out in one big wave, and then they made a couple of edits after. So in the very first version of the errata that came out early last week, fly was not included, and many of us were not sure if this was an intentional exclusion of fly. They have changed the errata since, which is crazy, to include fly, so now it's clear that mature animal companion is intended to effectively have the traversal trait from Starfinder. Then there have been a whole bunch of relevant spell clarifications. Condition removal spells used to have an issue where their heightened version did not explicitly say that the list was getting bigger. It made it sound like the list was getting replaced. No sane GM would have ever done that, but it is good to have this be explicit, just in case it trips up an inexperienced GM. Next up, Lore Master's Etude now has the composition trait. This is big. Previously, Lore Master's Etude did not have the composition trait. A bard that, say, has the Maestro Muse and has used Multifarious Muse to get Enigma, they could do a lingering composition and then use Lore Master's Etude without any penalty. Now, using Lore Master's Etude is going to correctly end your lingering composition, as it should. Some folks view this as a nerf to Enigma Bard. I think it's secretly a buff, because the Bard has this issue where Multifarious Muse means anytime you're discussing any of the muses that is not Maestro, the question is, why are you not Maestro plus Multifarious in whatever muse you want it thematically? Maestro just gives you lingering composition and fortissimo composition, both of which are exceptionally strong. And some of the muses have this problem less than others. Warrior, for example, you can justify not dipping into Maestro because Warrior has so many good feats. But Enigma was the one where if you're doing Enigma for recall knowledge, why not just be Maestro and then dip into Enigma? Because Lore Master's Etude has no competition with Lingering Composition. Now it does. Now when you use Lore Master's Etude, there's a real tension to using Lingering Composition. So I know on the surface this might look like a nerf to the Enigma Bard. It is secretly going to mean that you're going to see more Enigma Bards than before, in my opinion. Finally, many spells got rewording to be a little clearer than before. Enlarge is one of them. Previously, its status bonus could be misinterpreted to apply to instances of damage where it did not apply, and that has been rectified. There has also been a bunch of clarifications for other rules that are not super impactful, but still nice to have. Bombs without the splash trait no longer add strength to damage. Crashing Slam explicitly counts for 2 attacks for your multiple attack penalty. Previously, there was a lot of disagreement on whether this was true or not, and specifically, it could create some very crazy interactions with the rogue, the ruffian rogue, dipping into, say, Mauler to get Slam Down as an option, but now, with it counting as 2 attacks explicitly, it is fixed. There are a whole bunch of changes, and there's no one who can cover every single one of them in a video unless we're just reading it out to you, which I don't really want to do. So take your time, go through the errata, look at the changes one by one. There's a lot in there. You're probably going to find something I missed that was really crucial. There were a bunch of clarifications to upgrading and downgrading degrees of success. There were clarifications to assurance and whether it still counts as having rolled or not. A whole bunch of really good and really important clarifications that are going to make the game a lot cleaner in coming days once Archives of Nethys has been updated with all of these errata. So I recorded this video a few days before it comes out, which is Wednesday, 18th of February. On the 17th, which is yesterday as of the release of this video, Paizo released an errata to their errata, fixing the biggest issue I had with their errata in the first place. There was a weird change to weaknesses and resistances, which made the game's math a little unbounded. And they have already clarified that they will not be going forward with this. They have retracted that errata, and they have explained their intent for the upcoming change, where now weaknesses are intended to be able to trigger multiple weaknesses in one instance of damage, but not the same weakness multiple times. So for example, if something is weak to both slashing and cold damage, and you attack them with a greatsword that also has the rune that does cold damage, it'll trigger both weaknesses, but now if you also had some additional cold damage on top of that, like say from a spell heart or something, it won't trigger the cold weakness a second time. There also was something about resistances changing a little. It seems to me like every action and activity is henceforth going to have that clause that Flurry of Blows, Double Slice, etc. do, where they combine the damage for the purposes of overcoming resistances. This also applies to cases like the Magus, which previously used to be 2 separate instances of damage on a spell strike, the strike and the spell. Once the official clarification is out, we will know the exact details of this, but the end result is that I don't have to have the last 20 minutes or so of this video that was going to be me being a little negative about the weaknesses and resistance change, because they listened to our feedback and reverted the change, and I have no complaints from the intent that they're discussing here. So all of that to say, hats off to Paizo for having a good errata with one issue that they then reverted and fixed because they listened to the feedback. So that will be all for today's video, folks. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you can, join a channel membership. It is a small fee to directly support me and get a few perks out of it, like early access to videos and access to my written build guides. Otherwise, Mathfinder out. I'll see you next time.